So, Minister, once more, welcome. We're just going to present our opening remarks, and then we'll offer some coffee to our friends in the media while we continue with our deliberations. So, with your agreement, I will begin, and then I will hand over to you. So, Minister Dmytro Kuleba, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Excellency Ambassador of Ukraine to South Africa, senior officials, colleagues, I'm very pleased to welcome you, Minister, and your esteemed delegation to South Africa. Last year, 2022, we commemorated 30 years of diplomatic relations between South Africa and Ukraine, thus marking an important milestone in our relations. The relations between our countries date back to the period of our country's people's quest for their political and economic freedom, and also marks the support that Ukraine, then as part of the Soviet Union, provided to the freedom struggle. Our engagement today gives us an opportunity to review the current state of our bilateral, political, and economic relations with a view to unlocking opportunities for further deepening of our relations. It also gives us an opportunity to reflect and have an honest exchange of views directed at deepening our common understanding of regional, multilateral, and global issues of mutual concern and interest. I'm hoping that the outcome of our meeting today will serve to further revitalize bilateral relations between our two countries, as we've built good relations since our first meeting in Lisbon, in Portugal, and that the meeting will build on the foundation already laid during numerous engagements between ourselves and our heads of state this year. We also will exchange views on how best we could work together to strengthen relations with South Africa, Ukraine, and the rest of the African continent. How we can use this bilateral relationship to build a greater African partnership. We are deeply concerned, Minister, about the continuing war between Russia and Ukraine, the continuing loss of lives, and the very, very worrying humanitarian situation. We are in discussion with our own leader, President Ramaphosa, to look at how we can have a greater impetus to the African Peace Initiative to address our concerns with respect to this war. As the African continent, we have ourselves been witness to numerous conflicts and have overcome many difficult wars. All conflict has devastating effects on countries involved in them. The effects are felt both politically as well as economically, and in terms of the development opportunities for often innocent citizens. As a continent, we continue to strive to build peace, to strive to work toward developing a culture of peaceful resolution of conflict and the promotion of the importance of diplomacy and peace as the route to resolving any dispute. That's why we as South Africa always encourage a process of peaceful resolution of conflicts on our continent and globally. We believe the only path to peace is through diplomacy, dialogue, and commitment to the principles of the United Nations Charter, including the principle that all member states shall settle their disputes by peaceful means. And many people forget this particular provision of the UN Charter. We are also deeply troubled by the tragedy unfolding in Palestine, and we urge the international community to be louder in voicing a call for a cessation of hostilities immediately. During his address to the General Assembly in September this year, President Ramaphosa expressed similar sentiments to the ones I've referred to when he said as follows: "From the experience of our own journey from apartheid to democracy, we value the importance of engaging all partners to conflicts to achieve peaceful, just, and enduring resolutions. It is these principles that inform South Africa's participation in the African Peace Initiative, which seeks a peaceful resolution of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. In this conflict, as in all conflicts, we have insisted that the UN Charter's principle of respect for the territorial integrity of every country should be upheld. Our participation in the African Peace Initiative is informed by a desire to see an end to the suffering of those most directly affected by the conflict and the millions on our continent and across the world who, as a result of the conflict, are now vulnerable to worsening hunger and deprivation. As the international community, we must do everything within our means to enable meaningful dialogue, just as we should refrain from any actions that fuel the conflict. As we confront other conflicts in several parts of the world, including on our continent, Africa, it is vital that we invest in prevention and peace building." This was a quotation I extracted from his contribution at the General Assembly. Dear Minister, we're meeting at a time when the world is experiencing grave escalation of the conflict between Israel and Palestine. The carnage and senseless destruction of property, as well as the untold pain and suffering on all sides, should be condemned unreservedly. These events remind us of our own suffering at the hands of the apartheid machinery, and therefore we call for an immediate end of hostilities, unconditional provision of medical supplies, and humanitarian aid. It has thus become more urgent that the relevant UN resolutions and decisions are fully executed to ensure peaceful coexistence between Israel and Palestine for sustained peace. It is our belief, as President Mandela said, that the struggle of South Africa is not complete if the people of Palestine are not free. I look forward, Minister, to our engagement today, not only to review the status of our bilateral relations, but also to try and explore ways in which we can ensure that our cooperation increases in substance and diversity. May I then, having made these opening remarks and having welcomed you to our country, could I invite you, Minister, to present your opening remarks?
Minister Pandor, thank you very much for having me here today. I think you and I and our presidents set a very high threshold in the dynamics of bilateral dialogue between South Africa and Ukraine. It started with our first meeting in May in Portugal. It was followed by a visit of a group of African presidents led by President Ramaphosa to Ukraine. Phone conversations between our leaders and between ourselves have also taken place. And all of this led to my visit here to Pretoria. I'm happy to be the first Ukrainian foreign minister to visit South Africa since 1998. On the other hand, I am unhappy that the pause in high-level bilateral contacts between foreign ministers has taken so long. We should commit today never to allow this to happen again and to have regular political dialogue between our countries. We have a very meaningful program for today. As Minister rightly mentioned, we are discussing not only the bilateral relations between Ukraine and South Africa and the content that we can fill this relationship with. We're also talking about a larger regional perspective of African politics and development in Africa. And of course, no one in today's world exists in isolation. No peace, neither peace nor war exist in isolation in today's war. So while Ukraine has been suffering from the large-scale invasion by Russia since February 2022, we do observe and follow with utmost concern the crisis in the Middle East, and we wish peace to be restored, a just and lasting peace to be restored in the Middle East based on the principle of two-state solution. All of this is on the agenda today. We firmly believe that the deeper our contacts will be, the higher the level of trust between our nations will be, and there are all good reasons for that to happen, which will allow us to address the most sensitive issues in the bilateral and global agenda successfully and together. Be it the implementation of Ukraine's peace formula to end the war launched by Russia against Ukraine, be it cooperation in international organizations or development of trade and involvement of Ukrainian expertise in digitalization of government services or in the production of agricultural food products across Africa. All of this is at the table, and I'm looking forward to fruitful discussion and, as we diplomats like to say, result-oriented discussion. So thank you once again for your hospitality, and I'm sure that this is neither the beginning nor the end, but I think it's a very important step in our bilateral relations. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Minister. And thank you to the colleagues from the media. I'm sure, Minister, I've never seen so many journalists at our reception of other foreign ministers. So you're obviously extremely popular in South Africa because they take no notice of you. They're still very interested in you. So thank you for bringing so many journalists to my department. I'm sure they'll be able to enjoy and we'll see them in the life. Thank you very much for
Can you send it about 2 minutes? I'll send you the sound.
Oh, okay.
Minister Pandor talking about Palestine and Ukraine, and then the second one, this guy talking about SA and Ukraine and Palestine.
Yeah.
Then I'm trying to charge my phone.
Okay.
Hi, sir, charge again. Now I'll send it. Just send the card. And then they
Give But anyway, go, yeah, maybe go, so there's this lady that so she keeps passing. You're doing a link. Yeah. Of color.
Welcome. We're just going to present our opening remarks, and then we'll offer some coffee to our friends in the media while we continue with our deliberations. So with your agreement, I will begin, and then I will hand over to you. So Minister Dmytro Kuleba, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Excellency Ambassador of Ukraine to South Africa, senior officials, colleagues. I'm very pleased to welcome you, Minister, and your esteemed delegation to South Africa. Last year, 2022, we commemorated 30 years of diplomatic relations between South Africa and Ukraine, thus marking an important milestone in our relations. The relations between our countries date back to the period of our country's people's quest for their political and economic freedom, and also marks the support that Ukraine, then as part of the Soviet Union, provided to the freedom struggle. Our engagement today gives us an opportunity to review the current state of our bilateral political and economic relations with a view to unlocking opportunities for further deepening of our relations. It also gives us an opportunity to reflect and have an honest exchange of views directed at deepening our common understanding of regional, multilateral, and global issues of mutual concern and interest. I'm hoping that the outcome of our meeting today will serve to further revitalize bilateral relations between our two countries, as we've built good relations since our first meeting in Lisbon, in Portugal, and that the meeting will build on the foundation already laid during numerous engagements between ourselves and our heads of state this year. We also will exchange views on how best we could work together to strengthen relations with South Africa, Ukraine, and the rest of the African continent, how we can use this bilateral relationship to build a greater African partnership. We are deeply concerned, Minister, about the continuing war between Russia and Ukraine, the continuing loss of lives, and the very, very worrying humanitarian situation. We are in discussion with our own leader, President Ramaphosa, to look at how we can have a greater impetus to the African Peace Initiative to address our concerns with respect to this war. As the African continent, we have ourselves been witness to numerous conflicts and have overcome many difficult wars. All conflict has devastating effects on countries involved in them. The effects are felt both politically as well as economically, and in terms of the development opportunities for often innocent citizens. As a continent, we continue to strive to build peace, to strive to work toward developing a culture of peaceful resolution of conflict and the promotion of the importance of diplomacy and peace as the route to resolving any dispute. That's why we as South Africa always encourage a process of peaceful resolution of conflicts on our continent and globally. We believe the only path to peace is through diplomacy, dialogue, and commitment to the principles of the United Nations Charter, including the principle that all member states shall settle their disputes by peaceful means. And many people forget this particular provision of the UN Charter. We are also deeply troubled by the tragedy unfolding in Palestine, and we urge the international community to be louder in voicing a call for a cessation of hostilities immediately. During his address to the General Assembly in September this year, President Ramaphosa expressed similar sentiments to the ones I've referred to when he said as follows: "From the experience of our own journey from apartheid to democracy, we value the importance of engaging all partners to conflicts to achieve peaceful, just, and enduring resolutions. It is these principles that inform South Africa's participation in the African Peace Initiative, which seeks a peaceful resolution of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. In this conflict, as in all conflicts, we have insisted that the UN Charter's principle of respect for the territorial integrity of every country should be upheld. Our participation in the African Peace Initiative is informed by a desire to see an end to the suffering of those most directly affected by the conflict and the millions on our continent and across the world who, as a result of the conflict, are now vulnerable to worsening hunger and deprivation. As the international community, we must do everything within our means to enable meaningful dialogue, just as we should refrain from any actions that fuel the conflict. As we confront other conflicts in several parts of the world, including on our continent, Africa, it is vital that we invest in prevention and peace building." This was a quotation I extracted from his contribution at the General Assembly. Dear Minister, we're meeting at a time when the world is experiencing grave escalation of the conflict between Israel and Palestine. The carnage and senseless destruction of property, as well as the untold pain and suffering on all sides, should be condemned unreservedly. These events remind us of our own suffering at the hands of the apartheid machinery, and therefore we call for an immediate end of hostilities, unconditional provision of medical supplies, and humanitarian aid. It has thus become more urgent that the relevant UN resolutions and decisions are fully executed to ensure peaceful coexistence between Israel and Palestine for sustained peace. It is our belief, as President Mandela said, that the struggle of South Africa is not complete if the people of Palestine are not free. I look forward, Minister, to our engagement today, not only to review the status of our bilateral relations, but also to try and explore ways in which we can ensure that our cooperation increases in substance and diversity. May I then, having made these opening remarks and having welcomed you to our country, could I invite you, Minister, to present your opening remarks?
Okay. Minister Pandor, thank you very much for having me here today. I think you and I and our presidents set a very high threshold in the dynamics of bilateral dialogue between South Africa and Ukraine. It started with our first meeting in May in Portugal. It was followed by a visit of a group of African presidents led by President Ramaphosa to Ukraine. Phone conversations between our leaders and between ourselves have also taken place. And all of this led to my visit here to Pretoria. I'm happy to be the first Ukrainian foreign minister to visit South Africa since 1998. On the other hand, I am unhappy that the pause in high-level bilateral contacts between foreign ministers has taken so long. We should commit today never to allow this to happen again and to have regular political dialogue between our countries. We have a very meaningful program for today. As Minister rightly mentioned, we are discussing not only the bilateral relations between Ukraine and South Africa and the content that we can fill this relationship with. We're also talking about a larger regional perspective of African politics and development in Africa. And of course, no one in today's world exists in isolation. No peace, neither peace nor war exist in isolation in today's war. So while Ukraine has been suffering from the large-scale invasion by Russia since February 2022, we do observe and follow with utmost concern the crisis in the Middle East, and we wish peace to be restored, a just and lasting peace to be restored in the Middle East based on the principle of two-state solution. All of this is on the agenda today. We firmly believe that the deeper our contacts will be, the higher the level of trust between our nations will be, and there are all good reasons for that to happen, which will allow us to address the most sensitive issues in the bilateral and global agenda successfully and together. Be it the implementation of Ukraine's peace formula to end the war launched by Russia against Ukraine, be it cooperation in international organizations or development of trade and involvement of Ukrainian expertise in digitalization of government services or in the production of agricultural food products across Africa. All of this is at the table, and I'm looking forward to fruitful discussion and, as we diplomats like to say, result-oriented discussion. So thank you once again for your hospitality, and I'm sure that this is neither the beginning nor the end, but I think it's a very important step in our bilateral relations. Thank you.
And thank you to the colleagues from beneath our reception and other foreign ministers. So you're obviously very popular in South Africa, just so you know. So thank you for bringing a journalist to my department.
briefed the media on outcomes of last week's cabinet meeting. Ntshavheni says Pretoria is disappointed with Israel's continued bombing of schools and clinics in Gaza and the closure of humanitarian passages. Ntshavheni also says the cabinet is unhappy about the derogatory comments of Israel's ambassador to South Africa regarding South Africa's opposition to the war between his country and the Palestinian militant group Hamas. But for more on this, let's bring in now SABC International News reporter, or editor rather, SABC News International editor Sophie Mokoena. This is a really big story here, and it's interesting that this press briefing with the minister and the presidency would take place at the same time that you're seeing DIRCO Minister Naledi Pandor meeting with the Ukrainian Foreign Affairs Minister. Did that come up? Did this breaking news story coming from the presidency come out in those deliberations with the Ukraine?
Well, it didn't come up, but the minister did touch on the situation in the Middle East. As you know, that South Africa is quite firm in terms of the Palestinian cause. The minister even quoting the late former President Nelson Mandela, who said South Africa will not be free until Palestinians are free. And I looked at the Ukrainian diplomat, the Foreign Affairs. As you know, that the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, yesterday pointed out that the Hamas-Israel war is now taking attention, and also they are now left on their own. And therefore, with this story now, clearly the focus is on a decision taken by South Africa. But we will ask the minister. As you can see, I am in the media room here at DIRCO. As soon as they are available, I am going to ask the minister about this decision, perhaps to expand in terms of this, because you know that after the ANC took a resolution that government must withdraw from Israel and close the embassy, the South African government, in its capacity as a state, took a decision to downgrade the embassy, and therefore you still had people there. And it was more of liaison, in other words, assisting South Africans when they are in Israel, but also perhaps the business community. Now, with this decision, recalling the diplomats, it means that you are temporarily closing the embassy. And they indicated that it's for consultation. So the question is, what will the consultations be about? But also, how long is this process going to be conducted? But we know that what transpired yesterday, I mean, no country that speaks to human rights would have stand by and idling or looking away in terms of the bombardment yesterday, and particularly the utterances by the minister of Israel, a right-wing politician, I must say, indicating that the use of nuclear weapons can be an option, even though Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was quick to suspend that minister. He didn't fire, suspend, and therefore you expect him to be back in cabinet very soon. And I think Israel has completely lost it here. Those bombardments are shifting the sympathy from Israel to Palestine. We saw big protests around the world, even in capitals where you have the Western powers, where Western powers are sympathetic to Israel, including the Secretary of State yesterday, Antony Blinken, saying that what's happening in Gaza is very, very bad in relation to casualties when you look at women and children who are dying. And this afternoon, again, Israel will be on its back foot because the Secretary General of the United Nations is going to make a statement. I can't see Antonio Guterres holding back in terms of what transpired yesterday and those utterances by the minister in Israel in relation to the use of nuclear armaments. And the other issue, the Israeli ambassador to South Africa, he has been a strong voice in sort of rebutting whatever is being said. And at times, perhaps he went too far. I always do interviews with him. Sometimes I just ask myself whether it's this the diplomatic language. Now, here we are now, even questions raised, particularly after that Hamas spokesperson spoke to the media, particularly the SABC, because the attacks from the embassy and also from those who are sympathetic to Israel were really, really hard. And at times even bordering on free press, because you have to speak to both sides as media. So I think sometimes the politicians or the diplomats, when they get entangled in these kind of issues, they go too far and sometimes offending the countries that are hosting them. And I think this is perhaps what transpired. But as I pointed out, we will get clarity from Minister Naledi Pandor. And you know, on issues that are related to Middle East, she doesn't hold back. And as I pointed out earlier on, she touched on this issue, I think, 4 times in her statement. And I looked at the body language of the Foreign Affairs Minister of Ukraine. You could see that he was very uncomfortable because he realized then that this will dominate the headlines, contrary to what they want, that perhaps they can regain the lost ground in terms of public sympathy, in terms of what's happening in Ukraine. And therefore, yeah, we are here. The world is divided. The SG pointed out when he was in South Africa during BRICS that we are facing a very, very difficult time. And I think we are there with the war in Ukraine and the conflict in the Middle East.
Yeah, Sophie, if you will, I mean, and I want to stay with you a little bit because there's so much here really to unpack. Certainly over the past few weeks, what you have seen is South African government leadership really wanting to, I suppose one could easily say, take a nuclear, I suppose a neutral, the word is neutral, a neutral approach to how they tackle the tension between Hamas and Israel. Where we see now the withdrawal of diplomats from Tel Aviv and Israel, and even while meeting with the Ukrainian Foreign Minister, Minister Naledi Pandor, quoting Nelson Mandela on, you know, South Africa's freedom being so closely linked to Palestine. Are we starting to see government then be really quite decisive about which side of the battle it's on?
The South African government has always been clear in terms of the Middle East question. And as you pointed out, the minister this morning reminded the world that this is not something new in relation to the position the current administration has taken. It dates back to exile years, and later when they got into government, even our first democratic president made it clear, Nelson Mandela, who's revered around the world, that South Africa will not be free until such time Palestine is free. And therefore, sometimes I ask myself whether do we really have institutional memory in South Africa or around the globe in terms of where this foreign policy comes from. The same with Thabo Mbeki. He was quite firm in relation to the Middle East question. He even sent envoys to the Middle East to try and broker peace. He even invited Israelis and Palestinians to a caucus or a meeting here in South Africa, in Cape Town, in one farm, trying to push for negotiations, but it didn't help. And then you had President Zuma, who was also firm. I don't even want to talk about former President Kgalema Motlanthe, who also visited the Middle East many times. He was also, and I think he is still firm in terms of the two-state solution and really the Palestinian cause being at the center. And therefore, I don't think, there's nothing new. There is absolutely nothing new unless we lack institutional memory or selective amnesia.
Yeah. That's a very interesting point of view that you put forward. And the irony, of course, isn't lost on me that, again, you are in Pretoria really covering discussions between Ukraine's foreign minister and DIRCO minister Naledi Pandor. And yet, once again, we are now talking about Hamas and Israel. So essentially what the foreign affairs minister of Ukraine has said, we need the attention back on us. So can we do that for a moment? Highlights of what has come out of this discussion between the Ukrainian foreign affairs minister. And what happens now, right? What does that program look like for the two counterparts?
I think the profound statement he made was that the last time South Africa and Ukraine engaged in talks, it was in 1998. And it's strange because when you look at the Soviet Union, when Russia and Ukraine were still one people at that time, you know that many liberation activists got military training in Ukraine in particular. And when they went to Moscow, it was more of practical training. But really the practical military training to carry guns and fight, they got that training in Ukraine. And therefore, South Africa finds itself in a situation where the two are now divided and they have to navigate this division. And him saying that he wants to see this situation changing. In other words, the relationship between South Africa and Ukraine must continue. And we know that behind the scenes, it was happening. We had an ambassador in Ukraine. We had many South Africans working in Ukraine. We have many students receiving education or training postgrads in Ukraine. So the relationship was there, even though it was cool. Perhaps Ukraine didn't see the importance of South Africa at that time. But now they've since realized that this is a partner who is also having influence on the continent and globally. And therefore, we cannot forget them. And let's go back because, honestly, these were our friends when it was difficult for South Africans at that time, particularly the marginalized, the Africans who were oppressed. Yeah. And therefore, I think that was a powerful statement to start this meeting. But I am certain that behind the scenes, he did express this displeasure in terms of South Africa's posture in relation to the war in Ukraine. And I think the frank discussions did happen, but when they speak to us, clearly they are going to display diplomatic posture. But we will ask them, and as I said yesterday, the president of Ukraine did raise this issue of the Middle East conflict. But the reality is the world must ensure that both these challenges are attended to. You cannot choose. You have to address both the Ukraine conflict and the Middle East conflict if you want total peace, where the Security Council that was launched with the aim of bringing peace has failed to do so.
You know, once again, we're talking about this breaking news story, of course, that you've got even running at the bottom of your screen there, that the announcement is by the minister in the presidency that South Africa is withdrawing its diplomats from Tel Aviv in Israel. Now, behind the scenes now, as you and I are speaking, Sophie, the agenda team has just been in conversation with the Israeli ambassador to South Africa, Ambassador Eli Belatekovsky. And he told our team just moments ago that he's not aware of the withdrawal and has not received any communication to that effect. He says as a result he cannot comment at this point, and we'll bring in, of course, we'll keep you updated as that story does continue to develop. But perhaps this speaks to just the speed of diplomatic communications at a time when there is so much going on, right?
Well, I'll be in conversation with the spokesperson of Foreign Affairs of Israel at 5 p.m. South African time. This was a long-standing arrangement. In fact, I did the arrangement yesterday. I didn't know that South Africa was going to take this position. So they will be better placed to respond because it will be the Foreign Affairs of Israel, the spokesperson. And I think South Africa has already sent a communication communication to the Foreign Affairs Department of Israel. And we will get information. We will continue. This is going to be the big story of the day. And we will tackle the story in all angles. We'll go to our bureaus all over the world to get reaction. We'll get to the United Nations this afternoon. Shawan will be on standby to bring us the statement of Antonio Guterres. But Turkey did the same. And other countries chaired yesterday on the continent did the same. So we are going to see more countries taking this action of withdrawing their diplomats as a sign to express the displeasure in terms of the bombardment in Israel. And this is going to be a story that is going to be with us for some time. And that bombardment yesterday, children crying, women dying. And that is why people are asking, if Israel has a right to defend itself, is this the defense? And also the utterances by the minister saying that nuclear weapons can be an option, even though he's suspended. Remember, suspended, not fired.
Right.
And therefore, it is quite tense. And I saw lots of reports in relation to the Arab League and Arab countries. They are angry.
Yeah, look, there's so much to look forward to then. So I suppose at 5 o'clock we'll be watching for that interview, and then of course we'll be coming back as well to Sophie Mugwe now, of course, who is SABC News International Editor, who in moments from now will be speaking to the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Naledi Pandor. We'll bring you that conversation and a lot more as the story unfolds. But that is the breaking news story at this hour. South Africa has withdrawn diplomats from Tel Aviv in Israel. That announcement coming in moments earlier from Minister in the Presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, as she briefed the media on what came out of a cabinet meeting.
So Cabinet has decided that South Africa's diplomats in Israel will be recalled for further consultation on the situation in Gaza. The minister in the presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, made the announcement in Pretoria when she briefed the media on the outcomes of last week's cabinet meeting. Ntshavheni says Pretoria is disappointed with Israel's continued bombing of schools and clinics in Gaza and the closure of humanitarian passages.
A genocide under the watch of the international community cannot be tolerated. Another Holocaust in the history of humankind is not acceptable. And the South African government has decided to withdraw all its diplomats in Tel Aviv for consultation. Cabinet has also noted the continuing disparaging remarks of the Israeli ambassador to South Africa about those who are opposing the atrocities and the genocide of the Israeli government. This is despite the condemnation by the previous ambassadors of Israel to South Africa, who were clear that the acts of the Israeli government are a repeat of apartheid and not different to the apartheid antics. The position of the ambassador of Israel in South Africa is becoming very untenable. Cabinet has decided to instruct DECO to take necessary measures within the diplomatic channels and protocols to deal with the conduct of the ambassador of Israel to South Africa.
Meanwhile, the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba is visiting South Africa and will be in conversation with Minister Naledi Pandor. Let's speak to Kyiv Kumalo, who's following that in Pretoria. Kyiv, thank you. So, this, of course, the focus here will be on the conflict in Ukraine, but what has been said about Israel considering this very important diplomatic decision announced today?
Well, that's right, Francis. Quite a very bold decision there by the South African government. But of course, I mean, when you do follow the developments around the Middle East and also looking at the resolution of South Africa's governing party, the ANC, how they've just been calling for those diplomatic ties with the state of Israel to be downgraded. I think this is quite a very just move that is not surprising. But something that is quite important here, Francis, is that as Dr. Naledi Pandor is hosting her counterpart from Ukraine prior to their private meeting, she really just made mention of the current situation in Gaza, saying that it's a carnage, talking about the senseless destruction of infrastructure, but also calling for the international community not to sit back, to do something really in terms of making sure that there is a cessation of violence as the escalation of the conflict continues and so many civilians caught up in the crossfire. And also something also that's very concerning is that as much as the Israeli government has been saying that for them they're targeting the capabilities of Hamas, but if the schools, the hospitals and many other institutions are targeted, it really raises quite a number of questions. But also, most importantly as well, Francis, Ukrainian Minister Kuleba as well, indicating that they are calling for the cessation of hostilities in the Middle East and calling for the peace to be restored, but also most importantly emphasizing the issue of the two-state solution, clearly indicating that this is a very tough time for the Middle East.
The significance of the talks underway. What is hoped to come out of this meeting and the visit of the Ukrainian Foreign Minister in South Africa?
So it's quite a number of expectations in this regard, Francis. As you know, that South Africa and Ukraine do enjoy a very cordial relationship, albeit at times it's very challenging, especially in light of the current conflict that's underway. But we saw earlier this year President Cyril Ramaphosa leading some African leaders with the peace mission, meeting with President Zelensky, emphasizing the issue of the importance of the territorial integrity of Ukraine, but also raising concerns about the current crisis that is unfolding with so many civilians dying in this conflict, but also calling for the cessation of hostilities, also reaching out to the Russian Federation, President Putin as well, pointing out that this current conflict really is having far-reaching implications in the African continent. So many countries do really experience cost of living crisis and also a very expensive grain in light of this conflict. But also apart from that, this is an opportunity for these two countries to renew their bilateral ties, to look at new ways of making sure that they fortify these very important ties. But also for Ukraine, it's quite important. You do know that South Africa, notwithstanding its own challenges, it's still seen as a gateway to Africa, but also still seen as a very influential country in the continent. So it's quite important to have very good relations with South Africa.
And remember, South Africa was criticized for its response initially, said to be closer to Russia. So is Ukraine really trying to forge those relations because of the immediate impact that could have in the conflict? Because Africa, like you say, South Africa is influential across this continent.
Well, very much so, Francis. We do know that South Africa has been very defensive when it comes to its non-aligned position. And for them, they do insist that it's quite important to open the line of communication with the Kremlin, with Kyiv itself, so that they are able to reach out to the warring parties to understand that finding a long-lasting solution remains a very important issue. But also, we do know that, for example, the Russian Foreign Affairs Minister, Sergei Lavrov, has had an opportunity to have a charm offensive in the African continent. So it's quite a very important opportunity for Ukraine as well to rekindle those diplomatic ties with the African continent. And also really so that the continent also does understand the position of Ukraine. For example, when you look at the voting of the United Nations General Assembly, South Africa has been abstaining on numerous occasions because some of those resolutions really are crafted without their consultation. So it's a very important opportunity, but also to get an update, Sir Francis. As you recall, that in October, we saw President Cyril Ramaphosa, once again with his Ukrainian counterpart, President Zelensky, having a telephonic conversation about this conflict, looking at ways of making sure that we do see a finality of this conflict. But also something that is very important for the Ukrainians. We know that come December as well, the European leaders are going to meet. Ukraine is still trying to be a member of EU bloc. So it's quite important for them to be seen as a very good standing member, so to speak, within the international community, to meet all those litany of criteria to be able to be a very full member of the EU.
All right, Kailihle Kumalo live for us in Pretoria. Thank you very much. Back to the Middle East, smoke and flames were seen in Gaza's sky.
Thank you. Well, let me begin by once more thanking Minister Kuleba for visiting South Africa. We've had really, really excellent discussions on a range of matters, most particularly our interest in strengthening the bilateral relationship between Ukraine and Russia. We also devoted, between Ukraine and South Africa. We also devoted a great deal of time to discussing the peace process. The peace process led by 7 African leaders and the need to intensify the work that had begun in trying to identify those matters that would ensure that we get to a point where there's a genuine process leading toward a peaceful outcome for Ukraine, as well as the desired security for the Russian Federation. We briefed the Minister on the African development priorities, particularly the African Continental Free Trade Area implementation process. We briefed him on our regional integration agenda and the work we're doing in SADC to strengthen economic and regional integration. Also, South Africa's other peace efforts with respect to South Sudan, Ethiopia, and other parts of the continent, and committed that we will continue to be involved in the unfolding processes directed toward a peaceful resolution of the Russia-Ukraine war. We confirmed that officials from South Africa have been playing a positive role in the discussions on the Ukraine peace formula, which is a set of proposed outcomes that Ukraine has put forward as relevant to achieving a lasting peace. Our National Security Advisor to the President, Professor Mufamadi, as well as the Director General of DIRCO, and the legal advisor to the president have participated in all the deliberations on this peace formula, along with other BRICS countries, including China, as well as Brazil. And we hope that those discussions will continue and that they will lead to an outcome that satisfies the interests of the people of Ukraine. Minister.
Thank you, Naledi. First of all, I would like to congratulate all South Africans on the victory of your national rugby union team, Springboks, in the Rugby World Cup 2023. I spent half an hour last night watching the clips from the game, but especially how South Africans celebrated this victory. Well deserved. And given that South Africa has become a world rugby champion for the fourth time in history, I think it will not be an exaggeration to say that you have proven to be not only a true current world champion, but the best country of rugby of all times. Minister Pandor, thank you for your hospitality. I do confirm that we had an excellent in-depth exchange on a range of issues. And it was not only bilateral, it was not only about the Ukraine's fight against the Russian aggression. It was about much broader global issues, and I particularly appreciate the briefing that I received on a number of developments in Africa. Today, Ukraine and South Africa opened a new chapter in their relationship, one based on our shared aspirations for peace, security, and prosperity. Presidents Zelensky and Ramaphosa have given our bilateral relations a significant boost this year, and today we discussed how to maintain that momentum. The discussions we had demonstrated mutual understanding, respect, and a desire to strengthen our bilateral ties. I briefed my South African counterpart in details on the peace formula implementation, and I thanked South Africa for taking active part in relevant meetings in Kyiv and abroad. Historically, Ukraine has always been on the side of Africa. As a founding member of the United Nations, Ukraine, alongside with Nigeria, co-chaired the UN Special Committee Against Apartheid. We spared no effort to help you abolish apartheid and ensure the movement to a democratic society in South Africa. Last year, we launched the Ukrainian African Renaissance to revive and boost relationship between Ukraine and African nations. We are opening new embassies in Africa. Recently, Ukraine has become an observer in the Southern African Development Community, and today I very much appreciate the advice and recommendations that I received from Minister Pandor when it comes to developing relations with specific African countries and the African Union. Ukraine genuinely wants to contribute to the development and prosperity of African nations. Of course, we also discussed global food security. Even in times of a full-scale Russian invasion, Ukraine helps guarantee global stability and stands firmly against chaos and food crisis. Ukraine has always paid special attention to food security on the African continent, and President Zelensky's humanitarian program, Grain from Ukraine, aims to alleviate the negative consequences of Russian aggression on countries experiencing food shortages. The other topic of our discussion was nuclear security. Ukraine and South Africa have this thing in common. In 1990, South Africa gave up its nuclear weapons. In 1994, Ukraine gave up its the fourth largest nuclear arsenal in the world, and therefore the topic of nuclear de-escalation unites our top countries in the global agenda of nuclear non-proliferation. We today confirmed our mutual determination to advance the priority trade and economic dimensions of our relations, in particular by expanding business ties. Ukrainian businesses are eager to cooperate with their South African counterparts in agriculture, food industry, mining, mechanical engineering, information technologies, digitalization, pharmaceuticals, and other areas. I was pleased, as I said, to have these productive and constructive talks today. I'm looking forward to hosting Minister Pandor in Ukraine as soon as she can come. And finally, before concluding, I would like to thank the people of South Africa for supporting Ukraine since the beginning of the large-scale invasion of Russia. Your solidarity is priceless. We will always remember your support. And I take the responsibility to say that the foundations of this support lies not only in the sympathy that people in Africa have towards the people in Ukraine, and I appreciate the last remark by the minister that in the end the war in Ukraine should end in a result satisfactory for the people of Ukraine. But I also think that the concept of Ubuntu is relevant here, because this concept is centered, I was told, around the notion of humanity. And supporting Ukraine today means Ubuntu. So thank you very much.
We'll now take questions from the media. Please identify yourself, which media house you represent, and please use the microphone next to you. I'll start in front. Please identify yourself.
My name is Sophie Mukwena from the South African Broadcasting Corporation. Minister, the first question is directed to Minister Naledi Pandor. Minister, we just had the news that South Africa has decided to recall the diplomat in Israel for consultation. Can you briefly elaborate here in terms of what does this process entail and why? And two, South Africa has expressed displeasure in relation to how the Israeli ambassador in South Africa has conducted himself. Can you elaborate where and what? And then on the Ukraine, the matter before us, there were tensions. We can't hide that between South Africa and Ukraine, because South Africa was perceived as being aligned to Russia. Were you able, behind the scenes, to really front and deal with those issues? And to the minister. The minister spoke about the importance of South Africa, and we know that the relationship dates back to 8 years and all of that. And you raised concern that there was a lag from 1998. What could have been the reason? And lastly, much as you want South Africa to continue with the warm relationship, President Zelensky's advisors advocates last year that Africa is punching above its weight, and South Africa in particular, when the continent was trying to say, let's be part of assisting you to find one another, Russia and Ukraine. Is that President Zelensky's view that Africa is not an issue and you are only respecting the West? And then lastly, your views on the situation in Palestine.
I think since we've asked 2 questions, let's give the minister.
She's asked 10 questions. I was counting them. She said them out. All right. Why recall our embassy officials? This is normal practice. When there's a situation which is causing a great deal of harm and concern to a country, you would get your officials to come back to the national setting in order to provide you with a full briefing so that you can make a determination as to whether there is any potential for you to be of assistance and whether the continued relationship is actually able to be sustained in all terms. So we need to have this engagement with our officials, because we are, as you would be aware, extremely concerned at the continued killing of children and innocent civilians in the Palestinian territories, And we believe the nature of response by Israel has become one of collective punishment, which falls fully outside of the practice of international humanitarian and international human rights law. So in that regard, we felt it important that we do signal the concern of South Africa while continuing to call for a comprehensive cessation in Palestine. With respect to the displeasure, well, the ambassador of Israel has been making a number of comments almost akin to the statements that were made without proof by the United States ambassador a few months ago. And we felt it important that we should call the ambassador in, and really he should desist from making the kinds of statements he's making without having had any discussion with senior members of the government of South Africa. There seems to be a strange practice among some ambassadors in South Africa that they can just say what they like, and our ambassadors conduct themselves with good grace because that is the directive from us for their deployment elsewhere. But people think they can have a license because I don't know if it's because it's an African country and they disrespect us, but it's something that we should not tolerate. Then tensions. Minister Kuleba and I, we've been speaking on more than one occasion, and I think the genuine undertaking by 7 presidents of the African continent, which include President Ramaphosa playing a very important role, have signaled our genuine commitment to helping to find peace. And I think our original decision as the government of South Africa that we would be non-aligned and that we would keep open the possibility of engaging both governments was a correct decision. We're one of the few countries, rather regions of the world, that are able to speak both to Ukraine as well as to Russia. Not everyone is able to do that, because if you've taken a side, then you are held to that side, rather than being able to be of assistance in arriving at a resolution. So I think South Africa has ensured that it is in a position where it can play a positive role and can do so over time.
The pause in the relationship between Ukraine and Africa had only one reason. Ukraine got completely centered around its internal issues. We had to rebuild the country we had to transition the country from the Soviet times to democracy, economy from government controlled to market. We had to reestablish our place in Europe, and unfortunately I regret it. We did not, throughout this period, we did not allocate sufficient resources to maintaining what we had in our relations with African countries. If I look at the history of our relations with any country in Africa, there is this gap, the 90s and early 2000s. So 90s and 2000, first decade of 2000. And that's exactly coincides with the moment when Ukraine was drowning in its own internal problems. And this is why we speak not just about bilateral visits, but we speak about Ukrainian-African Renaissance, because we will never allow this relationship to sink in other problems, in the sea of other problems, because we see this relationship, these relations as an opportunity for all of us. The views expressed by advisor to President Zelensky do not reflect the opinion of President Zelensky whatsoever. President Zelensky is attaching great importance to developing relations with Africa. If that was not the case, I wouldn't be on my 4th visit to Africa in a year. I visited 12 countries, and most of them for the first time in history of our bilateral relations, second time in the history of relations with South Africa. We would not be opening new embassies. The only region in the world where we are opening new embassies while we suffer from enormous economic hardships brought by the Russian aggression against Ukraine is Africa. So you wouldn't be doing that if you did not respect the region, the countries, and the potential of this relationship. And for us, you know, every country matters. Every country in the world is special. I don't use the terms, for example, global south or the west, because I think they are essentially incorrect, because there is no such thing. Every country is special. Every country's policy is nuanced. Every country is taking its own stance, and you have to respect that. And if you respect that and you build trust on that, then you can deal with this country, have relations, and solve problems together. And that's what we are doing. With South Africa. We have to respect each other's perceptions, visions, knowing that no one is holding a knife behind one's back. And this is the fundamental premise. And we had a very candid conversation today, and I appreciate it. Our Ukraine's views on Palestine can be boiled down to 3 points. First, the attack on Israel by Hamas deserves condemnation. Civilians in Israel, in the Gaza Strip, need to be respected and protected. Two-state solution is the only way forward to establish fair and lasting peace in the Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to take the question from the back. Please introduce yourself with the microphone.
Thank you very much. My name is Ziana Goba. I work for Vision Africa. Perhaps my 2 questions are directed to Minister Kuleba. You've mentioned on more than one occasion today, the support that Ukraine provided South Africa during our struggle against apartheid and the spirit of Ubuntu, and yet recently your country voted against a motion for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Why is that? And do you believe, as recently remarked by President Zelensky, that the focus is now shifting away from the war in your country and has been more focused towards that of what's happening in Gaza? And does your arrival in South Africa and the timing thereof have anything to do with the sense of your country and your plight losing the goodwill of the global south because of the stance that you've taken with this recent escalation between Israel and Hamas? Thank you.
And we'll take the last question from this side. The ministers will continue with their program, so this will be the last question.
Thank you, Nelson. Was I speaking to this thing? Oh my gosh, this sounds fancy. No.
Just.
Yeah, Ingrid Plessis from Reuters. I had a similar question. I was wondering, to Ukraine Foreign Minister Kuleba, the war in Gaza, is it making the peace process in the Russia-Ukraine conflict a little bit more difficult? I'm also asking in the context of African leaders being involved in that peace process. Do you find that people's attention has been diverted, or and that the world's been more polarized since? And the second question is the Global Peace Summit of world leaders that Ukraine's been planning. Do you have a date for that yet, and will it still happen this year, or is it scheduled for next year? And will South Africa participate?
Well, I regret to say it, don't take it personal, that your question is not based on facts and is framed in a way as if to create a bad perception of Ukraine's position because Ukraine did not vote against the resolution. The very fundamental part of your question is misleading your readers and viewers. Ukraine abstained for the resolution. Second, this resolution was about many elements which we find essential, and we supported the amendment to this resolution that was condemning the attack by Hamas on Israel. Unfortunately, this amendment did not make it through into the text. But abstaining from resolution and does not mean voting against the resolution. And South Africa knows it better than anyone else.
They don't believe that.
Because South Africa abstained from all the votes on all the resolutions related to the large-scale invasion of Russia in Ukraine. I'm here not on a snap visit. We've been working on this visit for a while, and as I already mentioned before, going to Africa is our consistent policy because we want to revive these relations. It takes a lot of effort. I've been, as I said, to 12 countries already. I will be. We are opening embassies. I will visit more countries, and it has nothing to do with today's headlines in any media outlet of the world. It's a strategy. It's not demand-driven. It's strategic. Was attention diverted? Yes, of course. I mean, this is how world media work. New war always overshadows the old war. And if something else happens tomorrow in another part of the world, people will be talking about that. I regret to say it, but we understand the logic of media dynamics very well. And I can predict everything that will be happening with the war between Israel in the Middle East in the coming weeks, because it works the same all the time throughout history. So it's fair that people are paying more attention to the new devastating conflict in the world, but we do not feel that Ukraine is receiving less attention on the agendas on the global agenda. So media attention shrinked, but political attention didn't. That would be my kind of short response to that. No, we don't have the date of the summit, but once again, we appreciate that South Africa is a very reliable participant of discussions that should lead to identifying the date and the content of this summit. Thank you.
I think it's just important to always point out that when you abstain, it's not a no. It's often interpreted as a no because people have a particular perspective of their own. But in voting terms, abstain is not a yes nor a no. And the thing to study in the UN system is what's called declaration of vote, where countries make a statement on why they voted in a particular way, because that gives you the substance of the country's thinking.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the media interest in the minister's program, but unfortunately the ministers...
why don't you allow that?
We should allow the last...
Okay. Thank you very much. A question for Minister Kuleba. 6 months after a delegation of 7 heads of states visited Kyiv, have you seen any outcome of this mission? And Mr. Pandor, can you give us some news about this peace mission? What have they done so far?
What's your name and which media?
My name is Romain Chanson from Le Monde.
Okay. The next question. Okay, just shout. Don't be so much.
Turkmenisters from Turkish News. I want to ask my question to the Ukrainian Minister. ICC issues an arrest warrant for President Putin for unlawful deportation of Ukrainians. So Israel is currently now killing almost 500 kids in children a day. Are you not in some way justifying Putin's targeting of Ukrainian civilians by being silent on the ongoing killing in Gaza?
The last question. I will skip SABC because we've already given you a question.
Okay, this one for my name is Sam. I just want to ask a question about the 7 leaders, the peace mission. Are we likely to see this plan to consolidate with other, like neutral countries, peace plan on the Ukrainian and Russian conflict to be like to unify and be one family?
And that will be the last question.
The leaders have been in ongoing discussion on the 10 points that were tabled in the meetings that the African leaders held with President Zelensky and President Putin. There's been progress on 2 of the issues. The first is the return of children to their homes in Ukraine, and the second is the continued exchange of prisoners. We would like to see greater movement on the Black Sea Grain Initiative, because that's very important for purposes of food security. We also would like a process that leads toward outlining what the perspectives of the 2 countries are with respect to the probability of a negotiations discussion. We haven't got there as yet. I think Ukraine's peace formula lays a useful basis for movement toward that. But really the first prize is to have the 2 countries around the table and for us to begin to see a movement toward a peace negotiations outcome. We're not there yet. It is a difficult road, but we continue as Africa to be determined to play a role in the process.
The visit of African leaders to Ukraine was an extremely important moment of establishing direct contact, and Naledi and I remember that the second part of the meeting between them went behind the schedule because they had so much to talk about, and we do see a new quality of conversation. We do see new efforts being made in particular by President Ramaphosa. He remains in regular contact with President Zelensky. I talk with Naledi, so things are moving forward. The basis for, there is a big goal of peace that everyone is looking for, but there are things on the road to peace that can be achieved. And I'm glad that I see South Africa has focused on some of these areas, trying to deliver specific results. International Criminal Court is a legal institution. They make the decision on issuing warrants, prosecuting and judging criminals around the world. So it's up to them to make a decision. Second, if the death of every child in Ukraine was adequately covered and condemned by all countries openly in the media, we would have saved a lot of lives. I come from a country, on the one hand, everyone is talking about the war in Ukraine. On the other hand, so many daily tragedies became a routine. Tragedies in Ukraine became a routine for media in many countries, including friendly countries, that we in Ukraine find it extremely painful to see how the deaths of civilians, the deaths of children, and other mass destruction remains unnoticed. But we understand that this is how the world acts. And you mentioned silence. I think you are grossly misinterpreting reality and distorting our position. There are statements by the Foreign Ministry in which we insist, and I mentioned it today as well, on the importance to protect civilians. And we are ready to do what we can, but unfortunately we have very few leverage in this specific situation. So let's not antagonize what is happening in Ukraine and what is happening in the Middle East. People are people everywhere, and they suffer equally, irrespective of their nationality, their age, or their race. And we know the pain of people suffering in the Middle East better than anyone else, because our wounds are the freshest one. And when someone tries to distort that reality, to speak about disrespect to a life in one region compared to another, this is an insult against those who are fighting for peace and for saving lives of civilians, irrespective of where this specific war is taking place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think we should thank all the media for being here and for their interest in this matter. I hope they'll pay attention to the debate in the National Assembly tomorrow on the Israel-Palestine matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Switched it off.
Thank you very much.
Were you live?
Yeah.
Must check how your sound was.
Oh,
I will see when I was.
I wanted to ask about
So don't do that to her. Don't do that to her.
I wanted to